Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the History Hotline podcast with me, Deanna Lynn Cook, as your host. And I'm really excited actually to be joined by these two guests. If you listen to the episode about the conference in September that we did, I did say that some of the people that were part of that conference I hoped would be on this podcast in the upcoming future, and here they are today. So, introducing Dr. Michelle Asentewa and Craig Riley to the History Hotline. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for welcoming
Hello.
us.
No
Hello.
worries at all. And from the title, you'll know that we'll be speaking about Empire Road and Michael Abbensetts today. I wanted to introduce Michelle and Craig first, and then we'll get straight into the episode. So, Dr. Michelle Asentewa is a writer, independent scholar, and a cultural consultant. She's a co-founder of Way Wise Words Publishing, Editing, and Tuition Services, a multidisciplinary platform that specializes in cultural education, creative expression, and academic development. And she's also published books that include young adult novels, Elijah, The Awakening, and Other Poems, Guyanese Comfort and the Ritual Art of Trance, Something Buried in the Yard, Mamalou Tales, a folkloric biography of a Guyanese elder. And Dr. Asentewa delivers courses and workshops in creative writing, on Black writers, literature, African history and culture, and is the editor and publisher of In Search of Mami Wata, Narratives and Images of African Water Spirits. And we are so thankful to have you here today.
Thank you.
Now, on to our second guest, Craig Riley, who is a designer and founder of Studio Riley. After more than 25 years at a leading interpretive design firm where he was director leading national and international projects, Craig set up his own practice to pursue design of objects and spaces and experiences. With the help of Dr. Michelle, Craig led an effort with the support of the family to have his uncle, Michael Abbensetts, recognised for his contribution to British culture as a playwright and screenwriter, with an official Nubian Jack Community Trust blue plaque, which we'll be speaking more about today. As part of that campaign, various archive materials were collected from family, friends, and colleagues, and the next steps of building that legacy is to bring everything together to create a Michael Abbensetts archive. And here we are today. So, some people might be wondering, maybe the people that are my age, what is Empire Road? They may have never seen it, they may have never heard of it. So, do either of you want to start us off and tell us a little bit about the show Empire Road?
Michelle.
Craig, I see you waving it, waving for me to do that. Empire Road was the first commissioned drama series by the BBC, which ran from 1978 to 1979 on BBC Two. And as I said, Michael was commissioned to do that, and it was also an all-black cast as well, which was there was a diverse group of people in this area where it was filmed, and Michael commissioned to do this with just to highlight the fact of diversity and to show that as well as Coronation Street, which was on and has been on and still is on. There are other communities as well in localities that needed to have their voice heard. Prior to that, there had been programs about and Black people that were a little bit derogatory, racist, demonizing, and so
Mhm.
this was to give a sense of pride and a different representation to those communities.
Absolutely. And if I'm right, it was set in Handsworth, which is an inner city suburb of Birmingham, where my family come from. That's why I know about it. And there was a very large Caribbean and South Asian community in Handsworth at the time, and still is to an extent. So this show was really highlighting, as you said, Michelle, the life of these people that often weren't kind of brought into the frame of Black representation on TV. And you mentioned some of the representations before Empire Road came along, and in my mind, I'm thinking about Love Thy Neighbor. Is that the one
Yeah.
with Rudolph
Yep,
Walker?
that's one of them. There's Love Thy Neighbor. I can't even think because, to be honest, I wasn't actually in the country when Empire Road screened. I came here in 1980, But
Wow.
I think they were still showing some of those programs or they were doing reruns. I don't know, but I do remember them. I remember a lot of these programs we were cringing at. Um, you
Mm.
know, I remember things like Rising Damp. There was one with Alf Garnett. Craig, you might know more of
Yeah.
these.
Well, I mean, the worst of the worst was the black and white minstrel show, right? So,
Yeah.
in terms of representation on TV, Empire Road really smashed, smashed through that. And I think, I mean, Michelle, you mentioned about Coronation Street, and obviously Empire Road itself is a little bit of a nod towards that, very, very deliberately. So, and I remember speaking to Peter Ansorge, who was the producer, and he spoke about, there being um, I suppose that the BBC, and particularly in Pebble Mill, they were pushing at that time to make sure. Well, one, they were making TV programs that were about representation of actually how the UK was at the time, and then another was to be sure that it wasn't just a London-centric view, which added to that. Uh, a time captured when you could actually correct a lot of the view of the UK at that time. Say, actually, this is really what's going on in the UK at the end of the 1970s.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think it also paved the way, in some ways, for the TV shows that would follow. I think it was Desmond's, the episode I did on Desmond's, that we kind of found ourselves in conversation, Craig.
Mm.
But other shows like The Fosters, I think, would have come after, maybe, or maybe in line with. And so, the fact that this kind of show set precedents, and it was well watched and it was well viewed, it then allowed for more TV that looked like that, and showed the lives of people like that, following on. So very important show in the kind of context of the time as well for British TV.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was part of the intention as well, was to showcase the talent, that was there, as well as those lives that were real. And as I always said, Michael was writing from a perspective of trying to document or record real experiences. And from his perspective, it wasn't that it was like a series per se, where you have all those others that, like, they have a continuation that would naturally occur. But he was looking at particular standalones that were, experienced by the people within the area. So it was different in that regard. So yeah, it did set a precedent for a number of those earlier actors that are going to come in. He wrote a lot of his work. Norman Beaton, which we would have Desmond in. He wrote for him. He wrote them for quite strong male um, and female characters. I mean, at that period, probably a lot more male, but I think he was tending towards female representation in some aspects of his later works as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you want to
I
go,
was just, I
Craig?
was thinking, because I
Yeah.
only, there's one TV, actually, it's a movie that I hadn't seen until recently, Black Christmas, which was actually available, which was actually viewed before Empire Road, in fact, and it led to it. And what's so kind of extraordinary about that, I suppose, is one, that it was set in a within the context of many very progressive TV shows, with lives of Black people in contexts which had never been seen before, and also dealing. Was always sort of interested, and Michelle brilliantly, while our uncle was alive, recorded an interview with Michael Abbensetts, and one of the things that's captured in there is this idea that while the writing is about community of Black communities, South Asian communities, it's sort of trying to. Many of those things is trying to deal with some of the subjects that maybe even those communities don't want to be hearing about themselves, and that's what's so great about not Empire Road, but then also the work around that, and then the work followed by other people. It's like it allowed for that kind of writing, so that. I mean, I don't know so much about Desmond's. As far I remember listening to an interview with Trix Worrell where he speaks about. He sort of confesses, I think. Hope this is fair to say, that he's writing about Black people, but knowing he's writing for a white audience.
Yeah, I believe he writes in the context of trying to push back against a lot of the negative press about muggings and shootings, especially in London, in South London, to kind of counter that narrative. And I think he's writing, to be able to do that for a white audience.
Whereas I don't know that was a concern particularly of our uncle Michael Abbensetts. I think he was writing, and they were making real TV. I find that one of the most inspiring things about hearing my uncle talk in the interviews that have followed, and things that people have told us, is that that the importance of the writing, the craft of writing, and then how that has kind of inspired a generation of writers, particularly Black writers, but writing generally. He contributed to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really important point about the writing. And again, I'm coming from a perspective of doing history. I don't really think about the kind of art of the actual show in itself, and more what it can tell me about that historical time period. But actually, I think the beauty of it being a drama was that it could really seriously deal with some of the issues that were going on at the time, that were, even now, I think, I wouldn't say are uncomfortable to watch at all, but they are really important issues. So there was an episode we watched at the conference, Royston's Day, and that looks at the son Royston, and he's arrested because he's racially discriminated against, and there's a fight that breaks out at the club, and it's kind of like that generational difference of the kind of elders in the family saying, well, you should have dealt with it this way, you shouldn't have got into a fight, you shouldn't have been arrested, you need to do better, we're in England now, come on, fix up. And him kind of being like, well, I'm here and I'm still being treated badly, etc., etc. So that kind of tension of the generational differences, and in some of the episodes looking at the differences with the South Asian community and the Caribbean community in the episode of the wedding. And I think it's so beautiful the way that's done, in a way that couldn't really be done in a sitcom, because everything kind of has to end happily and in a laugh and a joke. So I really do, yeah. I think it's important that there are dramas. I think all the shows we've listed so far, and even the ones I can think about, are all sitcoms. It's like, I don't know, Black people could only be on telly if they were going to be funny and make people laugh. And don't get me wrong, Empire Road was funny. It had its moments, but it wasn't in itself a comedy, which I think is really important as well.
Yeah, that's a really good observation about some of the ones, because you're either, in those previous ones, you were either doing the cackling, sort of grinning, sort of
Mm.
Black, um, which was like the offshoot of that minstrelsy, um, or you were the butt end of someone grinning at you or making
Mm.
a joke about you,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But yeah, that's why I said Michael was really keen to tackle like these serious issues, whilst obviously being aware that you had to insert some humor every now and again, because at the end of the day, none of our experiences are entirely miserable. Even
Right.
in a society where you're being oppressed, or experiencing racism. how do those communities function, outside of that paradigm of oppression and discrimination. They still have to live. They still have to love. They still have to feel hurt. And in that latter one that you're talking about the wedding one, they still have to go through the cycles of life. So how are they doing this? And so Michael, in that particular episode, actually that was the last episode. When I think of it,
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, okay, bye, it's end. But what he was showing there was how the community is coming together for this celebration, and some of the food, the rum, the music,
Yeah.
everything contributes to what we would call our tradition, our sense of pride, our sense of identity, our sense of culture. And he was, in his way, always trying to celebrate that, and acutely trying also to map Guyana, because even when I came, uh, everybody who was not from continental African who you saw, they were Jamaican. They were Jamaicans. And he was really like trying to be very much clear that this family were Guyanese, even if Norman Beaton was the only one carrying carrying the Guyanese accent and idioms. So yeah, so those things, that observation about the comedy effect is important, and the distinction that Michael makes in his episodic series.
Yeah. And he talks about that as well. I was listening to some of the recordings that you sent me, Michelle, from the British Film Institute, and he talks about the need for comedy creating slipping issues in. It's like, it invites you in, it puts you at ease, and then he uses it as a writing strategy to then put something more uncomfortable to be dealt with, which is great. It's good writing.
Yeah, that's exactly what Royston's episode felt like. It was this: they go to the club, they're trying to get in, and there's a little bit of riffraff and, here and there, and then it's very serious very quickly. It is, I didn't ever kind of notice it, but now I'm thinking about other episodes, and that is exactly the way, yeah, you're introduced to some of these issues. And I think it's also important that he's writing in the 70s, in the late 70s, where that community, that Caribbean community in its broadest sense, and even the South Asian community, are really trying to establish themselves in Britain. They've only arrived kind of in the big numbers for about maybe 20 years maximum at that point, and are trying to kind of find their place in society, find themselves on TV and have this representation, but also, the actual nitty gritty of it. Family trying to toe the line of, they're now here, they've been here longer than 5 years. This promise of make some money and go back home, that's clearly not going to happen. And if it is going to happen for some, it's not happening for everyone. So at this point, they're deciding, we've set up shop here, we've got to make this work for our children and grandchildren. And I think it does come at a kind of perfect time historically for those kinds of conversations and that kind of feeling to happen, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And to add to that, I think it's really interesting, because I've been through all of the focus around the plaque. Of course, I've been kind of magnet to everything to do with Michael Abbensetts. I was looking at the novel of Empire Road, which is interesting, and the character, and really early on in the sort of the character, sort of giving the character to Everton Bennett, who's played by Norman Beaton. It's interesting because it's kind of, you're seeing a character who is probably not the character you may have thought Everton Bennett should be as a West Indian man arriving. He says things which are kind of very carefully actually in the novel. He says things about another community that then in the same sentence he says things that are derogatory about his own community. But it's interesting. It's kind of shocking. It's another one of those sort of insights. It's like we're not going to feed you here a story that you might think you know. We're going to start by giving this character. Michelle, you always speak about this kind of Godfather character in a non-violent sense, but in a way, all of the episodes are about the way that Everton Bennett has a kind of issue come to him, and they're resolved within an episode, and then the next one comes along. So you don't have any cliffhangers in that sense. They're all complete. But the example you gave about the club scene is again, it's such a good one. You're getting all these different viewpoints. You're seeing you're seeing an issue which is very much of its time, and also probably still something that happens today. But the different perspectives that's shown on, as you say, from different people in that episode is really enlightening. And as you say, it's historical. It's capturing a time which is really neat.
I just wanted to pause that conversation to bring in another conversation that was referenced early on in this episode, a conversation between Dr. Michelle and the man himself, Michael Abbensetts, in July 2001. And I wanted to bring in his comments about the use of the kind of protagonist, Norman Beaton's character, Everton Bennett, and the kind of inspiration for that character. And I will be inserting a few more of the clips from the interview between Dr. Michelle and Michael Abbensetts from 2001. I am so truly honoured and grateful that this clip was shared with me by the family, by Michael Abbensetts' family, so that I could share it with you in this episode today, and we could add some more life to the story of Michael Abbensetts and Empire Road.
Your depiction of Everton Bennett contradicted the stereotyped images of Caribbean men, often portrayed as lazy, womanising and chauvinistic. How conscious are you of representing images of the Caribbean male?
Well, yeah, it was one a conscious thing, but I also want to make the point. Throughout the series, he's called the Godfather. It wasn't that I wanted to have a criminal godfather, but I wanted a man that people in the area looked up to. That part of the thing about the series was that people would bring their problems to my main character, the Norman Beaton character, Everton Bennett, the Godfather, because so each separate story would be about someone bringing a different problem to ask him to help. So to do that, you had to have a character who didn't have lots of outside women, a man who people could really look up to. He had moral values. And so that was a conscious thing. But I also think there are a lot of black men like that, and that many writers, including myself, sometimes only write about the ones who are angry, or they have different girlfriends, and they're unfaithful. And that's only because that's the drama to some extent. But we are unfair to all the black men who are wonderful role models. And I definitely wanted that with the Godfather in Empire Road. And funnily enough, he was one of my most successful characters.
I think, Michelle, you brought up a point that I didn't want to forget, and that was the fact that Michael's writing and he brings in Guyana. And it is an important thing to do because, as I say on this podcast a lot, the representation of Caribbean people in Britain is very Jamaican. And I think that even though there is only what's his name?
Norman.
Norman Beaton, there we go, who is, carrying that by accent. It is very clear that it is not just a story about Jamaica, even though there are very clearly Jamaican accents and there's references to certain things that might prop up in Jamaica food culturally. But it is clearly, Empire Road is kind of the perfect title for it in a sense, because it really does span the whole of empire by way of the people that Britain colonized and then found themselves in Britain post-war. So I think, yeah, it's important because it's good to have, I think, that story that isn't just encompassing the one island Jamaica, but giving a bit of a broader um narrative. And I don't know if he would have, I'm sure he would have, but I don't know if he would have been able to do that had he set it in London.
But also bear in mind that Michael is coming out of a multicultural society when he's left Guyana. Because Guyana had,
Right. Yeah,
we
you're right.
had the indigenous, the Amerindian, we called, or they're called, and then they had the
Yeah.
Africans, then they had the East Indians, then they would have had the Portuguese,
Mm,
um, they had the English, the Scottish, you know, um, then you'd have like Michael Abbensetts' name is like Dutch,
I
so
have
you
wondered
have
that.
like a Dutch element. So he is already aware of that
Mm,
multicultural dynamic, as was I, to be honest. It's only really when I came here, and I would imagine it's the same when Michael's come here, that you're then like suddenly it's now there are these tensions. And I'm not saying that in Guyana there wasn't, because we had riots, we had race riots in Guyana, obviously. um, Michael would have left either at the time of it or just before it. He's coming on the cusp of everything. Like he's coming here on the cusp of the definitive race riots, and he's leaving Guyana on the cusp, on the edge of a similar thing. So he's very much aware of not only how these tensions can operate when there are different diverse groups, but how also within that they still need each other, and they still work together. They still, like Guyana, even just our food is a mixture of the different foods, and so yeah, so this would have been a comfort zone, but also one that he wanted to highlight how they operate effectively together and form community. Others of his work was done in London, but then yeah, you're right. I don't know how it would have necessarily worked, but London was also a bit of a melting pot at that time that he came. So
yeah.
but he lived where he was writing from, as I said, from what he had observed
Yeah.
in that area
No,
in
nice.
Birmingham.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
And it is here we will draw part one of this little mini series all about Michael Abbensetts and Empire Road to a close. I hope you'll be back joining me next week to listen to part two with Dr. Michelle and Craig to continue the conversation all about Empire Road and hear a little bit more from the interview conducted with Michael Abbensetts about his work, his writing, and the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you have a wonderful week. Goodbye.